To a man on his lunch break, an orange is a palate cleanser and amuse-bouche after the main. But to a starving man, an orange is possible salvation. Things, like words, can mean two things. The orange, however, like the dude, abides, being unto itself what it is. So it is with buildings. My primary school, for example, seemed a bit prison-y. To the better behaved, I assume it was like a fun fair or something. Meanwhile, the school was what it was, entire of itself. But what if buildings could free themselves, or be freed by their architects, of the stricture of type, of discrete identity, of typology? What might happen if, for example, a school and a house, schoolness and houseness, were hybridized? What if building and non-building even were wedded? Might this perhaps offer a way to negotiate, heal even, the nature-architecture divide? This is not wild speculation, but the proposal of Winka Dubbeldam in her recent edited book, Monsters and Mutants, Explorations in the Architecture-Nature Continuum, published by Park Books in 2025, and featuring essays by Winka, Justin Korhammer, Tom Main, Carlo Ratti, and Mette Ramsgaard-Thompson, and also the modus operandi of her and Justin Korhammer's New York, Los Angeles, and Hangzhou practice, architectonics. If you like what the Heirs for Architecture podcast does, and have the means to do so, please consider subscribing via the links in the podcast description.
A is for Architecture, a podcast about architecture, buildings, urban culture, and space.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Heirs for Architecture podcast. I'm delighted today to be talking to architect, theorist, teacher, scholar, writer, Winka Dubbeldam. Winka, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really pleased about this. It's a real privilege. We're going to be talking about your work and you, but mainly through the perspective of this recent book that you've published, Monsters and Mutants, which is out with Park Books this year, and includes texts by Tom Main, Mette Ramsgaard-Thompson, Carlo Ratti, and Justin Korhammer. It's a fascinating book. It's a very timely book. Hits a lot of things that I've been thinking about already, and probably I am only thinking about them because I read the book. But before we get to talking about that, who are you, Winka, and where did you come from?
Good question. I came from the Netherlands, and after graduation decided I really wanted to study Columbia University, moved to New York and forgot to leave. That's a very short version of what happened. So yeah, here's a Dutch architect in New York, and I probably left Holland because I really missed kind of the intellectual, theoretical approach to architecture, and went looking for that in Columbia, found it. And then basically worked for Peter Eisenman doing the same thing, which was really inspirational, and started my office shortly after graduating. I graduated in Columbia in 92 and started my office in 94. And basically, since I had always been studying and working in the same time, also in the Netherlands, when I was working, I started missing academics and then started teaching at Columbia University and UPenn. And maybe that's also where the interest came. So when I taught design studios, I would also give the students critical theory or philosophy or architectural theory. So I combined design teaching with theoretical readings because I found personally that is more inspirational to get closer to who you are and how you find your place in architecture than looking at other buildings. So for me, it's always been really important to read architectural theory. 1,000 Plateaus for a long time was my go-to inspiration. If I didn't know what to design, I would just read something on striated forms or the rhizome or whatever Deleuze and Guattari wrote about. Michel Serres, Paul Virilio, later Jane Bennett, Barbara Haraway. So kind of working myself through it and teaching my students about it. And I think, what is the beauty of being in academics, and now I'm the director of SciArc in Los Angeles. Being in academics really helps create a different view on architecture, maybe a more long-term view, and something that is based between what theoretically should be happening and what is going on right now. And architecture, as you know, is by nature a very slow profession. So for us as architects to be proactive rather than reactive is very important. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, it wasn't a long answer. I want to go back right to the beginning to quite a surprising thing you said, which was that, if I heard you rightly, that the intellectual milieu of Holland, this is in what, the 1990s, was not...
Early, I mean, late 80s when I graduated there, yeah.
This is before Super Dutch, so...
Super Dutch, that's funny. So Super Dutch was started by Michael Speaks, who worked with me at Eisenman's office because he was working for Cynthia Davison. I was bombarding him with Dutch stuff, and it's my fault. The big orange.
Oh my
big
gosh.
soft orange or whatever. The Super Dutch, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, very funny.
Well, so what was the context that you, I guess, escaped from?
Well, I mean, it was maybe my education, I don't know, but in Holland at that point in time, there was really no discussion about Derrida, which was very big here in the US with Peter Eisman, or even Paul Virilio and Deleuze and Guattari. So I used to meet with a philosopher in Delft, Wim Nijenhuis, who was the only philosopher I could find. And I would go meet him and talk about philosophy and try and learn by myself, because our education didn't give us anything on theory. It gave architectural history, but no architectural theory. And also it was never projective. It was never going out towards the future. It was always looking back. So I always was a feature forward person. So I just didn't know. I felt there was a huge gap in my education. And so came to Columbia and, met Kipnis and Eisman and Dan Allen and Hani Rashid and was a happier person for it. So I feel like in that time in Columbia, I probably, I always say I learned more in that time than in the Netherlands, but it's probably not true. It's probably like because I had a solid education, I could add easily to it. But yeah, it was really important for me personally to do the Columbia period.
It is interesting. I've been having this argument with some of my colleagues about exactly what you're saying about history and the preferencing of quite discrete histories taught to themselves. These days, sometimes infested a little bit with how is an Elizabethan manor house sustainable, which is really weird, just to try and make it relevant, I guess. But there is if one was to discover in any other of the professions that they spent 20% of their time at least learning about the history of, I don't know, in medicine, trepanning people, leeching people. It's very odd that it's always positioned as this thing we must do, but never reaches out into the design studio. Never becomes, as you said at the beginning, something that motivates or meets the values of the practitioner themselves.
Yeah, when I was chair at UPenn, I was chair there for 10 years. We reconfigured architectural history in the sense that we looked at theories of architects and how that propelled their work. So we looked at Alvar Aalto, Corbusier, Sharon, whoever, and just sort of try to understand their architectural thinking in order to understand their work rather than just looking at the work. So we started teaching architecture history through the looking at the theory of the architects and how that made into, or how that became architecture.
I have a hard job persuading my students that good architecture emerges from a consideration of philosophy.
I just forced them to read.
That's really difficult.
And have them present it back to us. Have the students present the work to each other.
You also obviously have a practice, architectonics, which, as you say, you formed. And you've mentioned Deleuze and Guattari and Thousand Plateaus and these various philosophers. How do you feel it's impacted your own design work, your own design practice?
Yeah, I think, one of the early books was with Princeton Press here in New York. And Mark, the editor, he looked at the work and he said, it's interesting, your work seems to move along according to fields of research you're doing. So, early on, surface became the second and a half dimension, surface as no longer separative wall, but a connective membrane. Then it became the armature, an object within the structure. So a build from within the build form that became generative of the other spaces. We call that the armature. So that whole book of Princeton Press was called Indexing. Was really about the fields of research we were doing and then how that resulted into architecture. And then you could say Monsters and Mutants is really only one project and the research we did alongside of it that actually didn't start necessarily. I was doing that research already when we won the competition there was an invited competition for the Asian Games, which is the Olympics in Asia. We won that in 2018, and I was doing research also with my students actually on mutations in nature, and I was really interested in that. So I started researching it myself. Why is it happening? Why, what is the reason? How does this change nature? And I found that it was one of the most unbelievable fields to get into, with incredible writers and really great research that also in biology is already interdisciplinary because it crosses a lot of different sciences. Like evolutionary biology is big there because it's not looking at, same as what we just said in architecture, it's not looking at what biology is, but evolutionary biology is looking at how evolution is changing from a very slow, gradual change into now sometimes very quick changes that break the traditional lineage of evolution. So I found this whole research on, for example, how plants and flowers can change and clean. So they're hyper mediators or hyper accumulators, how they can clean the soil, the water, and the air, and absorb pollution in rapid rates, but also in huge rates. But what happens when they do that? They react, no? So, for example, a sunflower can survive nuclear war or nuclear events like Fukushima. Then it can clean the soil and the water in really rapid rates. It stores the plutonium and all the heavy metals in its fatty tissues. And then the interesting part is they mutate. So in reaction to this environmental stress, they call that cresting or a fasciation, where the concentric core becomes like a warped, elongated shape, or sometimes even turns the whole flower inside out. And so evolutionary biologists call these flowers hopeful monsters. And that's where the title comes from. Hopeful monsters are really moments in evolutionary biology where there is the start of a new lineage, because these flowers can never go back to being concentric. But not only is this warping or cresting a sign of stress, it's also an incredible new beauty. And the flower itself functions even better because it has a bigger core and it becomes bigger, so it can absorb more pollution. So it's nature really dealing with what was going on and actually solving it for us. So, and then we win the competition. So I am, we are asked this very interesting question. The competition asked, it's 47 hectares, a mile or 1.6 kilometers long site that has to become a park. it also has to absorb something like 2 million square foot of buildings. But the park itself has to be a sponge city and has to remain 85% park. So just looking at the statistics, that didn't add up. And that was a really interesting moment for us, because I started thinking about the research and the idea that if you have a moment where things break and change, you have to add a new meaning or a new maybe with taxonomy or typology to it. So the first thing we did is make an interdisciplinary team, because we realized this was not a question for just architects. It's like a park of 47 hectares. It's like a huge area, and it takes a long time to walk it. I've done it several times in construction sites. And we decided to become equal partners with a landscape architect called Melk, also Dutch, but here in the same building, and structural and environmental engineers, Thornton Tomasetti. So they agreed, and we made an interdisciplinary team working 3 offices on the competition in the same time. So we developed nature, buildings, structures, and environmental thinking at the same time, which was super interesting. And I think it's partially or completely why we won, because we were the only ones that had fully calculated structures, a very complex scheme, but fully worked out structures, completely integrated nature, architecture, interweaving situation, and quite daring proposals. So that's basically the long and short of this. And that's why also I decided to start this book, because I thought it was really interesting how it actually came from, well, it were 2 occurrences that happened more or less at the same time and just started interweaving.
How does the architectural designer work in this kind of space? How does their voice get heard? Because of course our training is towards authorship.
Mm-hmm.
And, the preferencing of the design imagination, the privileging of the design review, the notion of the great drawing, and so on and so forth, and the heroic figures of our past, which we always still refer to. So how do you work in this way? Has it been fruitful, or has it been an uncomfortable but ultimately productive relationship?
It's interesting.
You probably can't respond to that because they're still your professional partners. But anyway.
I'm very I love very early on integrating engineers and everyone to begin with, because I've been since the beginning of the 90s 3D in the computer. So when you make a sketch 3D in the computer, you can quickly also send the Rhino file to the engineers and say, no columns, how do we do this? And then, so next question, boom. So I really work already with that feedback from the beginning. I'm not a person that would, I design a building and then when it's done, I send it to the engineer and say, solve it. I actually always work with them early on and say, I like to do this. Can we do that? And how would we do that? So that it becomes more integral to the design already. Because I've also learned you can save a ton of money and materials that way, and time, construction time. So that was done with all these buildings. So what we initially thought, because the question was great, no, like I have never heard a client say it has to be a sponge city and 85% park. So that was why we started thinking the buildings have to be different then too. We're not going to make white elephants that are empty after a 2-week game with a huge carbon footprint, 2 million square foot of buildings. This should really be for the city, and we'll loan it back to the Olympics. So we proposed in the competition already to make these all, there were 2 stadiums. We made those hybrids. The one stadium is enclosed, and we made that a concert hall, and we gave it back to the Olympics. So it's a concert hall designed with Olympic rules. And then we did a field hockey stadium that is a community center with sport fields. And both have quite daring structures. The enclosed space, the concert hall, I wanted to call them free. So All the structure sits in the inner bowl, and it's kind of a superdome structure that is beautiful. It's really fat in the middle and very skinny towards the end. As cantilevers out over the lobby spaces, the walls hang from it. And there is a ring under the roof with automatically opening windows that release hot air. So the building literally breathes. So all that was done at the same time. So you can see how this happens, no? So my environmental engineer is like, you need to let the hot air out, cool air in. We only air condition the seats of the viewers. So, talking about being hot, which turned out to be enough for that building. And then the structures were done in the same. So by doing that, the environmental way the building works, the structure is super light. The bottom is heavy of the building, and the top is super light. So it's almost like a tent on top of a strong base. But we saved overall in the whole production 120 tons of steel, and 20% in construction time. So by doing this kind of integral approach, we not only made the field hockey stadium has a shading wing that has a span of 125 meters, and it's free. No, it doesn't touch the building at all. And it shades the glass lobby, the viewers, and the players, which is quite interesting. So, and that whole wing, the only problem that wing had was uplift. So it's being held down like crazy with huge, strong concrete abutments. But yeah, so I mean, it's super interesting to start thinking of architecture in a different way, because you kind of have to throw everything out, because I didn't want the buildings then to look like stadiums, because if they look like stadiums, they're never going to be a concert hall. So that was one of the most important things, to rethink what typology is, and that maybe typology is no longer an adequate term, but that taxonomy, which is used in plants, as you know, is a more appropriate term, because that would be a what you call a dynamic typology. It's something that is in flux, and that is a hybrid. So for us, the hybrid is not two things merged and they're still recognizable. In our case, the hybrid has become one thing that is now doing two things, which is this different approach to what we normally call a hybrid, maybe.
Yeah.
And the other hybrid is a funny one. It was an underground shopping mall in the program. And the landscape architect and I looked at the site, and we thought the site was bifurcated by a road and a river, which is pretty drastic separation, 6-lane road, and a big river. We proposed in the competition to put a green valley from the one stadium to the other, that we made a shopping area. So it's a green valley with plants and misting devices and glass pavilions with green roofs, and shops and cinemas and fitness centers and whatever a shopping mall needs under the edges also of the valley. Hence, creating an artery, a social artery for the park that will always be quite busy, and turns out to be very, very busy. There's like art galleries, shops, a Starbucks, a comedian club, fitness centers, cinema complex. So it's like really, really intense in there.
It does look very beautiful.
Thank
Set in
you.
amongst these great staggering point blocks. The images on the Architectonics website are a very good illustration of the thesis.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to the book, which is, as I read it, the sort of foundational thesis is that we've developed in contemporary architecture a false dichotomy between nature and architecture, that we characterize architecture as that which is not nature to a large extent. And the whole program is about the exclusion of nature, something that came to the fore, of course, during COVID-19, where this whole notion of the permeability of environment became pathologized and terrified people. But where do you, in your reading, where and when does this divide come from? Who's responsible? Who can we blame?
Oh, we blame ourselves. Totally. humans, the human race. I mean, it's not for nothing called the Anthropocene, right? It's the era that was caused by humans alone, which means all the effects we see, you being hot, me being in air conditioning, um, the fact that we have hardly any real wild, what we call wild nature left, oceans full of plastic, oil, whatever else we put in it, antibiotics. It's all caused by humans. So the Anthropocene itself is really us doing it to us and doing it to, sadly, non-humans, all the plants, all the animals. We're destroying a lot. So the thought for us would be, if construction and households alone are 40% of the carbon footprint, we also have the capacity to change 40% of the carbon footprint, which means instead of thinking of it as a drama, think of it as an opportunity, proactive thinking, start to think, how are we going to erase 40% of the carbon footprint in order to do our part of what we have destroyed? So where it used to be the romantic idea, you had the wild, the famous paintings, right? That you had the wild and the building over here. Now maybe our buildings have to do the job of producing oxygen, absorbing carbon, protecting what we have left of nature, rather than counting on the trees that we seem to be chopping down left and right because we think we need toilet paper, which is kind of a shocking thought, or newspaper. I personally am on the heavy on the bamboo. I think bamboo, we have to replace all the wood construction, all of it, with bamboo, because bamboo grows way faster. It's much stronger. It also produces in 7 years. A bamboo, comparative in size to a tree, produces in 7 years what takes a tree 40. But we need trees because a tree alone is not that important. It's the forest that is the biome of the forest. That is the reason why we live, which is the biggest carbon sink we have together with the oceans. So our oceans and our forests, we need to protect. All this wood construction cannot happen. We need to stop that. We need to start thinking of bamboo or hybrid materials or recycle or use old construction materials. We don't have the luxury of being this careless with our forest and just tear it down because we think we need toilet paper. There's bamboo toilet paper we can all use. We can make newspapers or read them online or make it out of bamboo. We can make clothes out of bamboo. Cellulose is very easy to make. Forests, however, are very hard to make because it's the compilation of the mosses, the fungi, the plants, the trees, everything together is what is the carbon sink. And if we cannot replace a tree with 2,000 birch trees because it doesn't have a biome. So one of the most important things also for us in the park was to restore the biome of Hangzhou, and the landscape architect chose all the native plants. We replanted basically 47 hectares or 116 acres. The buildings that you see are just the two stadiums and a valley, that is the Reset Valley. All the other buildings are under the ground, and by having another really good biome thing is a zero earth policy, which means that the earth you excavate for wetlands, for the valley, we put back on parking garages and exhibition center and fitness center, other 4 buildings, which means that they are not buildings with green roofs. They're actually earth buildings. They literally have only a sliver coming out of the earth. So the earth tilts up a little bit and there's a sliver of glass that will give daylight. And the park itself has skylights everywhere, where you can look down, because every building has natural ventilation and natural daylighting to reduce energy costs. And that was really fun. So it's really a synthetic nature. It's the local earth reuse. So hence we have huge hills. This was a flat site that now has huge hills, because the other benefit of doing the zero earth policy was, instead of going a garage 3 floors down, we only went 1 floor down, 2 floors up, and put earth on top of it, which means now there's a forest growing on top of it, but it's a 20-meter high hill, which makes the park really quiet and really calm because it absorbs all the city sounds. So a lot of these sustainable things where we're like, oh, it's so difficult, it saves a ton of money, so it saved a ton of time. We didn't have to dig this far. The garages were built in no time. The earth was shuffled on top in no time. And so actually, by just thinking through it as a team with the client, a lot of it came also from the client. We were able to build all this in 4 years. So we won in May 2018. It was done May 2022, because the games originally were supposed to play in September 22, and they needed the other time for the interiors. So then we had COVID. It was postponed for a year, which was actually, for the nature part, really beautiful, because you could imagine in 22 all the trees had crutches, because they kept all this place was originally a green area. So they kept a nursery with all the trees. The birds' nests were moved during construction to the other area. The trees were moved into nursery. They had gardeners working there, and they had 40 greenhouses ready with plants. Because I said to them, because I didn't believe them. I was afraid it would be another stadium on a parking lot. I was like, yeah, they're going to do a park. They're like, no, we have 40 greenhouses full of plants waiting according to your specifications. We have 4 years to grow. We have grown-up trees that we have and we bring. And they literally rolled out the landscape in 2-3 months, which was unbelievable. And then the landscape had time to grow for a year, thanks to the pandemic. And was by 23 when they finally played the game. So the whole idea of us was, it's a park for the city. The buildings are for the city. We loan it back for 2 weeks to the Olympics. Thanks to the pandemic, all the buildings and the park were completely taken over by the city in 22. And for a year, everyone happily used it. And then it literally went the other way around. It had to be restored and brought back to Olympic cleanse the park, cleanse the buildings. And then the Olympics played for 2 weeks, and then I went back to the city again. So it was very, very beautiful, this kind of nonlinear use, where we thought, we design it for the city, first Olympics, then back to the city. It actually, weirdly enough, was first for the city, then got back to the Olympics and went back to the city. So the people in Hangzhou completely used that park for fishing, kayaking, Tai Chi, yoga, camping. They're camping all over the place. They maintain it. The elderly people in the neighborhood, they were gardening away in the park together with the official gardeners. It's beautiful.
That is a very lovely way of describing that. I am interested in this thing you said earlier about the difference between typology and taxonomy. I wondered if you could sort of describe that a little bit more, this idea of hybridity that you talked about and you've explained in Hangzhou and in your Asian Games Park, which seems to me, and I think you write about this, a sort of use of Latourian thinking, actor network theory thinking, inbuilt form. Has that kind of thesis been part of your intellectual journey, engagement?
Well, Latour talks about the actor network, not necessarily as a network, as in switch or as in highways, but he talks about it as two ecosystems collaborating in a way that creates another situation or another new situation. So for me, that when I was thinking, how do I think about a building that I don't want to look like a stadium, but has new futures, new opportunities, new uses, is part of the city rather than of the Olympics? What does a building look like? how do I work on that? And the original thought was actually not the flowers. It was I was looking at a stone jade artifact from China that no one really knows what it means. It's an intersection of a cylinder and a cube, and it's found in graves, and it's some symbolic thing that is interesting. I like the fact that no one knew what it was, so it's called the Chong. And I thought, if no one knows what that is, maybe that's the idea, that you take this stadium, which is an inner arena and an outer shell, in our case, two ellipses. Maybe what we do is we intersect them, and we start to create other spaces because of these intersections make slippages. Slippages from the inside to the outside, from the inside to the inside, and things start to move and are no longer symmetrical, but are dynamic. And that's where taxonomy comes in, because taxonomy in nature is always about change. Typology is about describing a type, but taxonomy is about changing type, if that makes sense. It's about growth and evolution. Because I was changing the type and really messing it up, essentially, if you want to be honest. I came in on a Saturday and I said to everyone, we've made a perfect stadium. And they're like looking excited. And it's like, no, that's wrong. We can't make a perfect stadium. We don't want to have a stadium. We want to have a concert hall. And, my office, they don't like it when I have these epiphanies, because they're like, oh, this is trouble. So I sat down with one of the people and was like, okay, let's do a few things. Let's start to see let's look at this intersection idea. And what does that mean? How does that change the typology of the stadium? So it literally also meant intersecting the surfaces. We had an opaque surface, which we needed, and something more glassy, and that was as far as we were, because we were sketching at that point. And so the opaque surfaces started to intersect with the glassy surfaces, and we got this really strange bulgy shapes. And there was suddenly a kind of a terrace that existed halfway the building. A string of windows started to exist. So by changing it, things started to occur. We found things. We found transparencies at points where we didn't know we had them. We found like opaqueness where we had no opaqueness. So suddenly the building looked super cool. One of the people in my office got almost a heart attack over it, and I think literally quit, because he said, you're making a mess out of this thing. And I'm like, it's what it needs to be. This is what it needs to be. It cannot be recognizable. And so we literally didn't resolve it for the competition. We just rendered it. And we made the opaque surfaces. I was thinking double curved surface. Let's do shingles. So we found this recycled aluminum that had some brass on it. We used those brass shingles because, on a double curved surface that slides. We did a die-grid, curved die-grid, double curved die-grid for the glass with big shards of glass in it. And we rendered it and called it a day and thought, if we win this, we'll resolve it. And then we won it. So we had to resolve it, which was funny. But it actually did solve all those things, because people don't see it as a stadium. They see it as this weird thing that they constantly film and circle around and study, and they're like, what is this? It's a very strange building. I love it. I mean, it's very weird. Every side is different because it's not symmetrical. It looks symmetrical. It looks like, because we did slide it through in one direction, but then it reacts different on two sides. So yeah, it's an interesting building. It's a very weird little hybrid that could be anything really. The nice thing is the landscape reacts to it. It gets part of its cooling from the wetlands next to it that our landscape architect installed. That balcony thing halfway, that terrace, looks out over the wetlands and is now the area where you have a drink during the break in the concerts. So it's interesting how that went, but I think the hybridity and the taxonomy is literally a about dynamic transformation that doesn't necessarily stop once it's built, because it allows for other use.
Yeah. And it sort of speaks to that point that you made at the beginning, that biological concept of when a system is under profound pressure, it will iterate in new ways. But for architecture, we have to make that decision ourselves. We recognize the pressure, and so now we have to place that pressure onto our buildings to move beyond the typological, the business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, in the 70s, it was done by making buildings super neutral. You made a big factory and everything was possible in the factory. In this case, I didn't want a neutral building that was a factory. I wanted a building that was particular for what it had to do, but it just had to do two things.
Complicated.
So a different approach, but it's not a new idea. I mean, in a way, Toomey and Rem Koolhaas very much thought of this in the 70s and 80s, where they were looking at other typologies. And you could say that the thinking started there. It's just this one is like a step further because it transforms more drastically. It's more nature, less building.
You've mentioned this idea of buildings as being instruments of planetary repair, rather than the general proposal at the moment, which is we can sort of soften the edges. We can reduce carbon a little bit. And you talk about this idea of mutations, productive mutation, which I really like. I mean, in your text, you refer to, again, quite a few theorists around this. Would you like to speak to this idea of this hopeful mutation?
Yeah, I think by creating something that is essentially a forest, but occupied, I think there is a beautiful symbiotic relationship between humans and non-humans. There's a ton of people working in that park, using the park, but and actually there's thousands of people in the park every day. But the park itself creates huge amounts of oxygen and absorbs huge amounts of carbon in the same time, while still being occupied. But the other beautiful thing was that one of the most delicate insects is the dragonfly. And when I was there, I came just before the Olympics, so it had been used by the city for a year. I just came 3 weeks before the Olympics to photograph it with my photographers, which was very fun because it was still occupied by people. But we found big swarms of dragonflies and insects and birds, nests and birds and rabbits, and because it's large, it's a large park. But because nature is so prolific, the river that goes through it, the landscape architect created islands in the river to speed the water up so the water would clean. There's wetland vegetation along the edges, again, to clean the water. So everything we did was not just, we also made a productive nature. We didn't just make pretty. It's pretty, but it's mostly productive. So everything we did there, we did to clean it and to make sure that nature itself started to clean the mess that we made. And that is actually working very, very well right now. I saw my contractor sends me these little movies still. What is it now? 23 years later. He sent me 2 movies this morning, actually, on people dancing in the park and kayaking, but also of all the animals living there. And I think the fact that, Barbara Haraway talks about this very much, like the idea that humans and non-humans have to start to collaborate in different ways, in more symbiotic ways, is really important. I think we cannot think that we are so important. We're not, and we keep throwing insecticides on cities, which means that there's no more birds because the birds eat either polluted insects or there's no insects, so there is no birds. And we keep doing this because we want no insect bites. It's just pathetic, what we're doing. It's so far-reaching. It's so much more far-reaching than we think. That it's really important to kind of allow these things to happen, to have insects in the park and to have dragonflies and birds. And in this park, it's actually the opposite. There's little signs against people, saying, do not disturb the animals. Do not, do not pick the flowers. They're for the bees. Things like that. And it's very nice that the park is talking to its inhabitants, saying, you need to take care of these animals. You need to make sure you don't destroy nature, because nature, the other side of nature needs it. And I think that is an incredible effect of being like that. When we did the field hockey stadium, we made it reset in the park so that the wing is really low and shading, so that also the people around it, and when you walk through the park, you can use that shading and actively have picnics under it, and sort of use it as a part of what the park gives to the neighborhood. And I think and it was a weird project. We did 8 bridges, a viaduct, an aqueduct. It's a strange, because we had to consider this river is not a straight river, as rivers are not. So the river comes in from the top on the left, and then crosses over next to the road, and then goes down, and then comes around the stadium and goes out the other end. So the river still does what it naturally does. And of course, in very human ways, we originally asked, can we straighten the river? Because it comes there and it goes there. And instead of doing this, we can just go there. And they're like, no, this is what the river does. We're like, okay. And they were so right, because it's beautiful to have that river crawling through the site and having to pass under it, and they build the aqueduct, and they build the viaduct under a 6-lane highway, which is amazing.
There's a sense of sort of ambiguity in the project that you've described, which I really like. Hybridity, ambiguity, in a way, seems to me, certain ambivalence about being capital A architecture, doing what architecture has historically done, which is, to a great degree, can be read as very impositional, very totalizing and impositional. In the epilogue, you talk about your hopeful monsters, but it's more than sort of spatial ambiguity, and it's more than boundary crossing. It's sort of more at a more profound level about recognizing the holism of not just humans and non-humans and environments and ecologies and values and stuff, but also about the intercommunication of these things, this perpetual negotiation. The outcome of that seems to me to be an acceptance of the incompleteness of architecture, that good architecture is always incomplete. It's an emergent property of social, technical, material flows, political, economic flows, which I think is really good. But how would you feel if the Olympic Park was changed? If you've invited ambiguity, and if you've invited in the notion of flow, and 10 years from now, someone's like, kind of want our tower block in here now.
I mean, I don't think they'll build a tower block inside of the park, because it's their favorite park, and it's the strategy of the government, right? It's not, and it's totalitarian. So, but the other thing is that the real estate around the park has gone up 300%, and that was right after the game, so maybe now more. It's also attracted different buildings. They're bigger, they're more beautiful, they're like farther spread apart. So it's changed the neighborhood also. And the idea of daycares and schools are now growing around it, because I kept talking to them about the idea of the hutong, the old hutong, that used to have everything integrated, living, working. The houses were on top of work, right? There were these kind of little townhouses. You lived on top and you had your shop on the bottom. They had daycare, they had organized group daycare, group healthcare, group whatever. And I said, you come from a culture that was very integral, and you've separated into these skyscraper fields that have no social space, that have no healthcare, no education. You have to travel really far to go to a shop. Why don't you use this park for all those things? And they are. So I am actually for that park changing into more functional things for the neighborhood, like daycare, and that they have. The landscape architect and And we as a team decided from the beginning, we were building skate parks, playground, children playgrounds, sport fields, outdoor arenas. We built that in the park. We built change in the park. We want it to be for the people. They can do whatever they want with it, as long as they don't build your skyscraper in it and keep it green. But the idea that it was occupied and for the people, and there's bicycle lanes through it, all the pavement is porous, which is what we need to do in general. All cities need to become porous. But yeah, it is built for change. So I'm not that worried about them. One of the people here I saw they were camping everywhere. And so we have this beautiful outdoor arena with a little stage that has a bedland behind it, and it's very pretty. And one of the guys here in my office was like, "Oh God, they're camping on my stage." I was like, "Is it okay?" I mean, people take over. It's what they do. But at the same time, they're maintaining it. They're gardening. They're taking ownership of it, which I really love. So you have endless amounts of people gardening in that thing. And I think that's amazing. So yeah, it will change. They put lighting, I always felt like LED could not be all the colors. And the only thing, of course, I see now is that they change happily blue light, red light, whatever. I'm like, Whereas the Olympics, at least they listened to me and only did white light. But yeah, they're going to use it and they're going to make it alive and working for them, and good for them.
Is this a model for the future of practice?
I hope so. Yeah. That would be good if we could build more of these. There's a lot to learn from China. I mean, I learned a lot from China. Their attitude of having sponge cities and really changing. They have changed their carbon footprint drastically. They have changed so many things already. They have sponge cities in 25 or 30 of their cities. They're making that every urban design has to be like that. So not just the parks, but also the neighborhoods. Everything has to be porous. Everything has to have bioswales. So yeah, we should all learn from them at the moment. It's very impressive what they're doing. So I think hopefully in the future, all our streets are porous. We build way more porous areas in the streets with trees, and we need to green our cities. Not just say we are greening our cities. And make sure that we protect nature, because we have so little left of it. Whatever was wild.
Exactly. It's a wonderful point to finish on. Thank you very much, Winka. It's been lovely to hear you talk.
Thank you. Thank you for the great questions.
It is true, we shall be monsters, cut off from all the world, but on that account we shall be more attached to one another. So said Mary Shelley's Creature of Bits in 1818. Hopefully, hybrid architectures won't meet the same awful fate, of course. Thank you to Winka for the conversation, and to Diego and Nikki at Architectonics, and to Dominica Schultz at Park Books for the groundwork. Please see the podcast description for links to the book, to Winka at work and at university, and to ways you might want to support the podcast with money. And thanks for listening.